Kilauea volcano alert raised as a swarm of small earthquakes hits the region. CNN, the U.S. Geological Survey Hawaiian Volcano Observatory has raised the volcano alert from advisory to watch for the Kilauea volcano after an increase in earthquake activity under the south part of the Kilauea summit caldera within Hawaiʻi Volcanoes National Park. According to release from the USGS. While the Kilauea volcano is not erupting, the onset of the earthquake swarm was coincident with a change in the style of ground deformation at tiltmeters in the Kilauea summit region, potentially indicating the shallow movement of magma beneath the south part of Kilauea caldera, the release states. Over 140 earthquakes were recorded by 4:30 a.m., 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, with the largest being a magnitude 3.3. Most of the earthquakes were less than magnitude 1, but small earthquakes are continuing at the rate of at least 10 earthquakes per hour. The release adds, the aviation color code has also increased from yellow to orange, though USGS says no smoke cloud has formed. In December, the Hawaii County Civil Defense Agency asked residents to stay indoors after the Kilauea volcano erupted following a series of earthquakes. U.S. resumes operations at Kabul Airport after U.S. forces killed 2 armed men. CNN, violence erupted at the Kabul airport as U.S. forces shot and killed 2 armed men who fired on them Monday. The Pentagon said, as the U.S. resumed temporarily suspended operations at the airfield after clearing crowds off the runways. As the chaos at the airport and the tumultuous U.S. withdrawal continued, President Joe Biden was briefed by his national security team about the situation and then flew from Camp David to Washington to prepare to address the nation about the state of affairs in Afghanistan, as the Taliban solidified their control of the country. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby told reporters there had been 2 security incidents at the airfield at Hamid Karzai International Airport, involving armed individuals shooting at U.S. forces. In 2 separate incidents, U.S. forces did respond to hostile threats, and that resulted in the death of 2 armed individuals, Kirby said during a briefing on Monday. He said, there is no indication that the 2 men killed by U.S. troops were Taliban, and added that while the mission at the airport is not offensive, U.S. forces have the inherent right of self-defense. A witness, however, told CNN the 2 men shot and killed by U.S. forces were Taliban fighters and that a 3rd fighter was injured. According to the witness, the Taliban fighters showed up at an airport entrance just as multiple high-profile foreign and Afghan vehicles were trying to enter the airport through the same entry. The witness says that in the confusion, the Taliban fighters shot into the air to try to clear the gate and that the U.S. military fired back, killing 2 of the men and injuring a 3rd. CNN has been unable to independently verify the 3 men were indeed members of the Taliban. Confusion. The gunfire underscored the turmoil and confusion that have marked the sudden U.S. exit from Afghanistan. All U.S. embassy staff are at the Kabul airport, which is now under U.S. control as the Pentagon and U.S. allies work to evacuate personnel, even as flights began again. The defense official warned that the military anticipates continued sporadic clearing operations if crowds continue to gather. Meanwhile, Taliban spokesman Zabihullah Mujahid tweeted Monday that the group is nearing full control of Kabul, the Afghan capital. The situation in Kabul city is coming under full control, Mujahid said. He added that the Taliban have arrested most of the people who were involved in violence in the capital after their takeover of the city and reiterated the Taliban promise that the group would not go from door to door in search of former government officials. Kirby told reporters that about 2,500 U.S. troops are now at the airport. Over the next 24 hours, The Defense Department expects additional forces to arrive, from both the 82nd Airborne Division and battalions from a Marine Expeditionary Unit, he said. Once those additional forces arrive, there will be about 3,000 U.S. troops at the airport by Tuesday, he said. We will continue to expand our security presence as needed, Kirby said. Once additional forces approved by Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin arrive at the airport in the next 2 or 3 days, total U.S. troops will number about 6,000. They will be charged with securing the perimeter of the airport. A U.S. defense official told CNN. The U.S. military had temporarily suspended air operations at the airport while U.S. troops cleared Afghans who had flooded onto the airfield in a desperate rush to escape. The Taliban. A U.S. defense official told CNN. Some Afghans had reportedly surged toward departing planes, making frantic attempts to scramble onto and then cling to the aircraft as they took off. Video has emerged of several people clinging to the fuselage of a U.S. military C-17 aircraft as it taxied Monday. There are scores more people watching or following the plane, some of them underneath its engines. Other video shows a U.S. military Apache helicopter swooping low over the tarmac in what appears to be an effort to disperse the crowds. Separate video circulated on social media shows a U.S. C-17 soon after takeoff. At least 2 objects, or people, can be seen falling to the ground as the plane gains altitude. CNN cannot independently verify that anyone was still clinging to the aircraft when it took off, and it's not known whether it was the same plane or whether the crew was aware that people were clinging to it at all. Multiple U.S. defense officials told CNN they could not confirm the incident. Regime change, amid the reports of airport unrest and a sudden U.S. decision Sunday to rush an additional 1,000 troops to Kabul. The leading U.S. military commander in the Middle East met with Taliban officials Sunday. General Frank McKenzie, the commander of U.S. Central Command, met with Taliban leaders in Doha, Qatar, to underscore that the sole U.S. mission was to get people out safely, a defense official said. Also on Sunday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke separately with the foreign ministers of Australia, France, Germany and Norway about the security situation in Afghanistan, along with efforts to bring their citizens to safety and assist vulnerable Afghans. On Monday, Blinken spoke to the Chinese and Russian foreign ministers as well. Calls the State Department described only briefly in readouts. Moscow's foreign ministry issued its own readout, saying Blinken and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov discussed the situation in Afghanistan after the head of state of the country fled. The collapse of the current government and the de facto taking place regime change. According to the Russians, Blinken told Lavrov about the U.S. evacuation and the urgent humanitarian tasks. The two agreed to continue consultations about Afghanistan with representatives of China, Pakistan, the UN and other interested countries. Biden administration officials continue to insist the U.S. can stabilize the situation, issuing talking points to allies on Capitol Hill and making media appearances to defend Biden's decision to pull out. The United States has the forces that are necessary to bring stability and security to that airport, Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner told CNN's Brianna Kīlauea on New Day. I think they have gone a great distance towards doing that since some of those images have aired. Feiner said of scenes of mayhem at the airport. There are going to be more forces flowing in throughout the course of today and tomorrow. And we believe we have what's necessary to be able to enable these flights to continue as soon as possible, Feiner said. Feiner said the U.S. also issued a warning, making clear to the Taliban, in no uncertain terms, not to interfere with Afghans who are attempting to get to the Kabul airport for potential evacuation. But Feiner also added that those Afghans should wait until they are told it is time for their evacuation before going to the airport. We are asking people, in an orderly way, when their flight is called, Feiner said. And again, this is not going to be just a free-for-all. It can't be, for security reasons. When people's flights are timed, we are asking them to show up at the airport to be present to get on those flights. Not just whoever happens to come to the airport. Accelerating the evacuation. State Department spokesperson Ned Price said on Monday that some 1,600 individuals had been airlifted out of Afghanistan on U.S. military aircraft in recent days. Earlier, State Department officials had estimated there were a total 4,000 embassy employees, U.S. citizens and Afghans, waiting for evacuation. Price said the 1,600 was in addition to 2,000 Afghans applying for special immigrant visas who had been flown out earlier. As the Biden administration prioritizes the evacuation of American personnel from the country, it curtailed the number of government-sponsored evacuation flights to the United States for Afghans who worked alongside the U.S. for the time being. Three sources familiar with the situation told CNN Sunday. Late Sunday, the Defense Department and State Department announced U.S. forces said in a joint statement that, tomorrow and over the coming days, we will be transferring out of the country thousands of American citizens who have been resident in Afghanistan, as well as locally employed staff of the U.S. mission in Kabul and their families and other particularly vulnerable Afghan nationals. And we will accelerate the evacuation of thousands of Afghans eligible for U.S. special immigrant visas, nearly 2,000 of whom have already arrived in the United States over the past 2 weeks, the joint statement said. For all categories, Afghans who have cleared security screening will continue to be transferred directly to the United States. And we will find additional locations for those yet to be screened. This story has been updated with further developments and details Monday. CNN's Oren Lieberman and Kylie Atwood in Washington, Anna Corin in Hong Kong, Vasco Cotovio in Lisbon, Tim Lister in Spain, Gianluca Mezzofiore in London, Johnny Hallam in Atlanta, and Zara Ullah and Anna Chernova in Moscow contributed to this report. Next up for COVID vaccines. Kids under 12. CNN, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has given full approval to Pfizer's coronavirus vaccine for people age 16 and older. Approval for youths ages 12 to 15 is expected to follow soon. I don't think it'll be long before they extend it to 12 to 15. Maybe within a few weeks to a month or so, said Dr. Bob Frank, director of the Vaccine Research Center at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. Parents are already clamoring to hear more about approval or authorization for children under 12, however. Studies looking at that are underway. It appears that kids can get a much smaller dose of vaccine than adults and still get the same immune response, Frank told CNN. That's good news, because it means vaccine supply can be stretched further, Frank said. We took a step back after we did the adolescents, and we looked at the dosing. Because we thought that we may be able to use a lower dose and be able to get the same immune response, Frank said. It looks like children ages 5 to 12 get a strong immune response with 10 micrograms of vaccine antigen, Frank said. So 1/3 of the dose that we're giving adults. Or even 1/3 of the dose that was used in 12-year-olds and above, was just as immunogenic. We got just as good an immune response as the 30 microgram dose and there were less side effects, he said. So because of that, for the 5 to 12-year-old dosing we are looking at 10 micrograms, and then in the younger kids, under 5, even going down further to 3 micrograms. That might be confusing, but it simply means children have a stronger immune response, Frank said. It just really proves as far as that the kids' immune responses are good. They're very strong, he said. A lot of people are asking us, does this mean you're giving us less of a vaccine? I said, well, we're giving you less antigen, but their immune response is so good that they're making the same immune response, so there's no need to give more vaccine, Frank added. We're giving enough vaccine to be able to get the same immune response as we're seeing in people 25 years of age that are getting 30 micrograms. More is not better. Frank said, the immune response hits a maximum and giving a higher dose doesn't boost it. We were able to decrease by a third, and still got the same immune response, he said. As with adults, side effects are generally mild and do not last long, Frank said. The side effects we're seeing in the kids are really identical to what we're seeing in adults, Frank said. That includes a sore arm, fatigue, headache and fever in about 10% of children, he said. Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, said he was confident the trials would show good efficacy among younger children. I don't think there's going to be any question that this is going to be effective in the children at that younger age. I have no doubt about that, Fauci told CNN's Anderson Cooper Monday evening. Dr. Amanda Dropick, a pediatrician in Florence, Kentucky, enrolled her 4 children in the trials for various ages at Cincinnati Children's. I talked to my kids about it. We all agreed that in order for everybody to get vaccinated, somebody has to be willing to step up and go first, she said in a video released by the hospital. We miss traveling. We miss vacations. We miss concerts. We miss sports activities. So hopefully as our kids are vaccinated and then other people get vaccinated, it'll really help, Dropick said. I am just really looking forward to hanging out with friends. Going to places without worrying about masks or where I can eat, said Dropick's son, Ben, now 16. Who took part in the trial for Pfizer's vaccine in the 12 to 15-year-old age group. It is important to get the vaccine so you stop the spread of coronavirus and so the virus won't hurt any more people, said Ben's younger brother Eli, 10. Frank's team is starting vaccine trials now testing Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine in kids under 12. The hospital is due to enroll 75 children, he said, 25 in each age group, 6 to 12. 2 to 6 and infants to age 2. As with all the coronavirus vaccine trials, investigators like Frank are speeding up the bureaucratic steps for submitting vaccine data to move the process along more quickly. Typically what happens is that you get a result from a phase 1 trial, and then you're showing it back to the company and saying, okay, is this good enough that we're going to go to a phase 2, and then having to think about it. And then you same thing with phase 2 to phase 3. Here it just marched right along because the funding was already available, he said. Often a study lasts 4 or 5 years. And the researchers gather all the data up at the end of that period of study and submit it to the FDA. So you can imagine getting 4 or 5 years worth of data all at one time. That's a lot to try to process, he said. What happened here was that the FDA, for authorization to use its vaccines in children ages 5 to 11 by the end of September, once it sends all the data in. Moderna, whose vaccine is authorized for people 18 and older, has filed with for EUA for children 12 to 17. It expects to have data ready on younger children later this year. Johnson & Johnson is in active discussions with regulatory authorities regarding our development plan and trial designs for teens and children and expects to start trials in the fall. Charlie Watts, longtime drummer for the Rolling Stones, dies at 80. CNN, Charlie Watts, the unassuming son of a truck driver who gained global fame as the drummer for the Rolling Stones, has died. He was 80. It is with immense sadness that we announce the death of our beloved Charlie Watts. He passed away peacefully in a London hospital earlier today, surrounded by his family, his spokesperson said Tuesday in an emailed statement to CNN. Charlie was a cherished husband, father and grandfather, and also as a member of the Rolling Stones, one of the greatest drummers of his generation. We kindly request that the privacy of his family, band members and close friends is respected at this difficult time. The band had announced earlier this month that Watts would miss the band's upcoming North American leg of its No Filter tour, after undergoing a medical procedure for an unknown condition. Watts became part of the Stones' longtime foursome alongside singer Mick Jagger, guitarist Keith Richards and bassist Ronnie Wood, anchoring the band's blues rock sound from his drum kit for more than 50 years. His first love was jazz, always a reluctant rock and roll star. His true love was jazz. Watts was born in 1941, when Hitler's bombs were still falling over London. He grew up in the West London suburb of Wembley. From a young age, Watts was passionate about drumming. He would rap out tunes on the table with pieces of wood or a knife and fork, before his parents bought him a drum kit when he was 14, his mother said. He went on to study graphic design at the Harrow School of Art. His first job was in advertising and, in his spare time, Watts wrote and published a children's book about jazz legend Charlie Parker called, Ode to a High-Flying Bird. The preface read, "This story was compiled by one Charlie to a late and great Charlie." At the same time, Watts played in a band with Alexis Corner, the founding father of the British blues scene, in Ealing, West London, where the late Stones member Brian Jones, Mick Jagger and Eric Clapton were also guest musicians. In 1962, Jones formed the Rolling Stones with singer Jagger, pianist Ian Stewart and guitarists Keith Richards and Dick Taylor. Watts turned down the group's first offer for him to join, finally conceding and playing his first gig with them in January 1963. In 1964, the Stones reached number 1 on the British pop charts with their cover of Bobby Womack's It's All Over Now. The Jagger-Richards songwriting team created its first bona fide classic, I Can't Get No Satisfaction, in 1965. The band enjoyed a string of hit singles well into 1966, including Paint It Black, 19th Nervous Breakdown, Get Off My Cloud, Have You Seen Your Mother, Baby, and Lady Jane. The group maintained enormous popularity for decades with classic albums like Aftermath, 1966, Sticky Fingers, 1971, Some Girls, 1978, and Tattoo You, 1981. And with massive stadium tours that took them all over the world. He and his wife lived in rural southwest England in the 1980s. Watts finally found time to pursue his passion for jazz and formed a 32-piece band called the Charlie Watts Orchestra. Their first gig was in the legendary London jazz club Ronnie Scott's, where Watts was a frequent, if undercover, visitor. In the early 1990s, Watts released several albums with another group, the Charlie Watts Quintet, including a tribute to Charlie Parker. He married Shirley Ann Shepherd in 1964, and the couple had one daughter, Serafina. They remained married until Watts' death. Watts, a heavy smoker, was diagnosed with throat cancer in 2004 but fully recovered. He spent most of his time on his estate in Devon in southwest England. His wife bred horses and owned a well-known stud farm. In more recent years, Watts formed an old-school blues band called the ABC&D of Boogie Woogie, preferring to play in intimate clubs. He nevertheless continued to play with the Stones, most recently on the European leg of the band's No Filter tour in 2018. Watts is survived by three of his longtime Stones bandmates, Jagger, Richards and Wood. Drummer Steve Jordan, a former member of the house bands for Saturday Night Live and Late Night with David Letterman, is scheduled to take Watts' place for the Stones' upcoming tour, which is scheduled to start on September 26 in St. Louis. CNN's Chloe Milas contributed to this report. Afghanistan flag to feature in Paralympic opening ceremony as a show of solidarity, CNN. The flag of Afghanistan will be used as a symbol of solidarity and peace, as the Tokyo 2020 Paralympic Games kicks off on Tuesday night in Japan. The 16th Summer Paralympics, delayed by a year due to the pandemic, will take place amid Japan's worst outbreak of COVID-19. With spectators banned from the majority of events and Tokyo and surrounding prefectures under a state of emergency due to surging case numbers. Speaking on the eve of Tuesday's opening ceremony at the Olympic Stadium in Tokyo, President of the International Paralympic Committee, IPC, Andrew Parsons said he was determined the Paralympics would be held safely. One of the questions I am asked very often is, can we have safe games? And the answer is yes. We would not be here if we did not believe we could deliver safe games, he said. Parsons confirmed Afghanistan's flag will be incorporated into the opening ceremony parade despite Afghan athletes pulling out of the games due to flights being cancelled from the country. Kabul's airport has been the focus of the world's attention this week after the Taliban seized the capital, with thousands of people trying to flee the new regime. We will include the Afghanistan flag in the ceremony in a sign of solidarity, and we have invited the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees representative here to act as the flagbearer. Parsons told reporters, "It is important to highlight that as it is a message of solidarity and peace that we send to the world," he added. "We would like to have them here, unfortunately it is not possible. But they will be here in spirit." The Taliban's takeover in Afghanistan is seen as a threat to the nation's sporting ambitions, with sportswomen afraid they'll be punished for trying to compete. In a statement to CNN Sport last week, the IPC said it was supportive of the practice of sport as a basic human right. Every individual should have the possibility to play sport and no one should be discriminated against because of their disability, gender, sexual preference, race or religion, it added. Read. After 72 operations, Paralympian says, body and mind is stronger than you can imagine. COVID outbreak earlier this month. Japan waved goodbye to thousands of athletes following an Olympics widely viewed as a success despite a litany of scandals and the backdrop of surging coronavirus cases in the country. The hosts are now primed to welcome thousands more athletes as the Paralympic Games get underway, scheduled to run through September 5. There was an absence of spectators for 97% of competitions during the Olympics, including in all Tokyo venues, with limited capacity in several other prefectures, and last week. Organizers said the Paralympics would also be held behind closed doors amid the pandemic. Japan has reported nearly 435,000 COVID-19 cases and 577 deaths in the past 28 days. According to data from Johns Hopkins University, Tokyo, the epicenter of the country's outbreak, confirmed 2,447 new cases on Monday, down 515 from the same day last week. It was the first time in 2 days for the capital's daily tally to fall below the corresponding day in the previous week, on August 17. The Japanese government extended the state of emergency in Tokyo and other regions to September 12 as cases soared. The Delta variant raging across the world is causing unprecedented cases in our country, Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga said. Serious cases are increasing rapidly and severely burdening the medical system, particularly in the capital region. It means athletes will have to compete without family and friends in the stadium. Something which some competitors at the Olympic Games said they struggled with. Nonetheless, Paralympic triathlete Melissa Stockwell, one of Team USA's flag bearers, said she's looking forward to making the most of it. It was pretty tough to hear the news that family and friends were not going to be allowed at the games, Stockwell told CNN. I had these images of running down the finish line with my husband and my kids on the sideline yelling, "Go, Mommy, go." And that's not going to happen, and that's very unfortunate. I think as far as my family goes, they're not here physically, but they're here in my mind, and I'll still hear those, "Go, Mommy, go," screams in my mind as I run down that finish. Read. Afghanistan's first female Olympian says women will not give up their liberties easily. Paralympic debuts despite the very real threat posed by the pandemic. Organizers insist they can still host a safe and successful Paralympic Games, pointing to the relative success of the Olympics. The same strict precautions will be in effect with athletes confined to small social bubbles and required to undertake extensive testing. But fans can still get excited to watch athletes compete in 22 different sports, with badminton and taekwondo making their Paralympic debuts. Bhutan, Grenada, Maldives, Paraguay, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines will also be taking part at a Paralympic Games for the first time, with 162 delegations set to compete. There are 3 more nations competing in Tokyo than there were at Rio 2016, but London 2012 still holds the Paralympic record, with 164 delegations taking part. It is always special to see an NPC, National Paralympic Committees, make their first appearance at the Paralympic Games, Parsons said. With all the challenges created by the pandemic, seeing these NPCs as part of the opening ceremony on August 24 will be an extra special and emotional moment for all concerned. Refugee team. Among those federations competing will be the Refugee Paralympic Team, which consists of 6 athletes, 1 woman and 5 men. The IPC says the group represents the more than 82 million people around the world who have been forced to flee war, persecution and human rights abuses, 12 million of whom live with a disability. Bayern Munich's football star Alphonso Davies penned an open letter to the refugee team ahead of competition, saying those involved were an inspiration. "Not everyone understands the journey you have been on," wrote Davies, who himself was a refugee before his family moved to Canada. "But I do. And that's an important part of what made me who I am. I've read your stories and learnt about the journeys you have all been through. You are the most courageous sports team in the world right now. One of the things I know about sport is its power to change lives. You are all role models now with the power to inspire others. Make no mistake. What you are about to do in Tokyo will change people's lives. There are going to be young people who will take up sport because of you." Body of Afghan found in U.S. military plane's landing gear. The body of a dead Afghan was found in the landing gear of a U.S. Air Force plane that hastily took off from Kabul airport on Monday as thousands desperately tried to climb aboard even as it taxied down the runway. Human remains were found inside the C-17 transport plane's wheel well after pilots were forced to make an emergency landing in a nearby country because they were unable to retract the landing gear. Sources told The Washington Post. The person is believed to have climbed onto the landing gear and tried to stow away before the plane departed in the frantic attempt to flee the country after the Taliban takeover. Shocking videos showed masses of Afghans chasing after the plane as it down the runway, with some managing to cling on as it took off. At least 2 people plunged to their deaths moments later as the plane rapidly gained altitude over the city. The gruesome discovery of the human remains was among the disturbing developments to emerge as Americans hastily evacuated in chaotic scenes that left at least 7 people dead. The images of American helicopters ferrying diplomats and personnel from the U.S. Embassy in Kabul to the airport prompted comparisons to the fall of Saigon in 1975 when the U.S. military pulled out of Vietnam. Former President Donald Trump noted the history linking the two embarrassing evacuations. What took place yesterday in Afghanistan made our withdrawal from Vietnam look like child's play. Perhaps in world history, there has never been a withdrawal operation that has been handled so disastrously, he said in a statement sent via email, adding that President Biden has brought great shame, in many ways, to our country. Footage taken by a U.S. contractor showed dozens of military weapons, combat gear and vehicles that had been abandoned by troops at the Kabul airport as they evacuated. The contractor said there was nobody guarding the weapons. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby said late Monday that the U.S., which had taken charge of air traffic control at Kabul's airport, had resumed airlifts out after suspending them for several hours due to the stampedes onto the runways. The U.S. had to rush in additional troops to help secure the airport and protect Americans still trying to evacuate. Meanwhile, Biden rejected blame for chaotic scenes of the bungled withdrawal. He called the anguish of trapped Afghan civilians gut-wrenching, and conceded that the Taliban had achieved a much faster takeover of the country than his administration had expected, but stopped short of assuming responsibility for the bedlam. He expressed no second thoughts about his decision to stick by the U.S. commitment, formulated during the Trump administration, to withdraw from Afghanistan and end America's longest war. Despite declaring that, "the buck stops with me," Biden placed almost all blame for the shockingly rapid Taliban conquest on the Afghans themselves. Antarctica is changing. The impact could be catastrophic. Camille Seaman didn't need Monday's UN report to learn that the Earth has been warming at a breakneck pace. She's seen it with her own eyes. The photographer has been visiting Antarctica on and off since 2004, working on expedition ships for National Geographic. In just the past few years, she has witnessed a noticeable change on the continent. "What I have seen from 2016 to now, it's like a different place altogether," she said. Seaman points out the snow algae she's photographed, which often turns the snow pink and sometimes green. "That's a normal occurrence. That's not unusual," she said. "But what is unusual is I had never seen it before March blooming in the glaciers. And now it's showing up in January and December. That's like 3 months early. And there are places where I had never, ever seen the ground. There had always been some snow cover. And now it's just mud and rocks. The white landscape isn't so white anymore." Last year, Antarctica registered a record high temperature of 18.3 degrees Celsius, or nearly 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Petteri Talas, Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization, said the record is consistent with the climate change we are observing, and noted that the Antarctic Peninsula, the northwest tip closest to South America, is among the fastest warming regions of the planet. The WMO says temperatures on the peninsula have risen nearly 3 degrees Celsius, 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit, in the last 50 years. That has led to an increase in melting ice, which raises global sea levels and threatens coastal cities across the world. It's one of the many issues listed in Monday's State of the Science report from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Scientists say the planet is warming faster than previously thought and that the window is rapidly closing to cut our reliance on fossil fuels and avoid catastrophic outcomes. Melting of polar regions is also having a troubling effect on some of the wildlife that calls those places home. Chinstrap penguin colonies in some areas of the Antarctic have declined by more than 75% over the past half-century. According to independent researchers who joined a Greenpeace expedition to the region before the pandemic, they believe climate change is largely to blame, saying less sea ice and warmer oceans have reduced the krill that many of the penguins rely on for food. Phytoplankton blooms on the underside of the sea ice. And that is what the krill feed on, Seaman explained. And then the penguins feed on the krill. The whales feed on the krill, seals and sea lions feed on the krill. So it has this incredible chain effect. If you lose the sea ice, you lose this phytoplankton. You lose the phytoplankton and then you start losing the krill. And it starts to chain all the way up. Higher temperatures can also be difficult for cold weather penguins, especially chicks, Seaman said. She recalled being on Antarctica's Paulet Island when it was about 60 degrees Fahrenheit last year. She photographed a baby Adelie penguin with its tongue sticking out to cool off. There were thousands upon thousands of these penguins just in distress because they were so overheated and there was no snow, she said. They were looking for any little patch of snow or ice to lay on. Some penguin species in Antarctica, like the gentoo, are more adaptable than others, Seaman said. Adelie penguins are declining in some areas of the continent and doing well elsewhere. Seaman wasn't that into penguins when she first visited Antarctica. But now she looks forward to them and seeing what they might do next. They're really quite interesting characters, and you can't help but admire them, she said. They have an incredible sense of humor. I've seen it many times. They will fall flat on their beak, like trip in the snow or whatever, and when they get up, I swear they look around to see who saw. Seaman, who has been documenting the polar regions for years, found this week's UN report very troubling. But not surprising. Like young climate activist Greta Thunberg, she is frustrated with the inaction she has seen across the world to reduce carbon emissions. I'm with Greta on this. We should be acting like our house is on fire, Seaman said. If you even just pay attention to the news this week, with the fires in Greece and Italy and now Algeria and Oregon and California. This is not normal and it's only going to become worse. This is just the beginning. She hopes the news will wake people up. That report this week is devastating. But it might just be the kick in the pants that a lot of us need in order to get up and do what we need to individually do, she said. Seaman is even starting to question her own trips to Antarctica and whether she can do more to make a difference. She hasn't been there since the start of the pandemic. She hasn't visited Svalbard, Norway, for a decade now. The archipelago, between mainland Norway and the North Pole, is home to hundreds of polar bears. I haven't been back to Svalbard since 2011. Partly because there was no ice and that meant the polar bears had to be on the land, she said. And I didn't want to be the reason that we had to shoot a polar bear, just because we were in its environment. It was around 2011 when Seaman was feeling particularly frustrated and hopeless about climate change. But her 11-year-old daughter told her not to give up. You have to try. You have to do something. So now she pours herself into her work to raise awareness about the issues. If the only thing I really know how to do is make images that hopefully can communicate emotion and information, then that's what I do, she said. She has also given TED Talks and other speeches. All the time, people ask me, what can I do? What can I do as an individual? And I say, stand up for that one thing that you love about this planet. Whether it's roses or monarch butterflies or that oak tree in your yard. Whatever it is, whales or polar bears. Stand up for that, and you will find that you are not alone. That there are other people who love that thing and don't want to see it lost on our watch. Allison Felix makes history with 11th career medal at the Tokyo Olympics. American Allison Felix has made history in what will almost certainly be her last Olympic race. The sprinter earned a gold medal in the 4x400-meter relay Saturday. The 11th career medal gave her more medals than any American in track and field history. She already set the record one day earlier for the most medals by a woman in Olympic track and field history. Felix took the bronze in the women's 400-meter on Friday, her 10th career medal. The Americans assembled an all-star lineup for the 4x400 relay. Sydney McLaughlin, the gold medalist and world record holder in the 400-meter hurdles, led them off, followed by Felix. She handed off to 400-meter hurdles silver medalist, and Rio gold medalist, Dalilah Muhammad. Athing Mu, the 19-year-old sensation from New Jersey who won gold in the 800-meter in Tokyo, closed the race out. The U.S. dominated the race, winning in 3 minutes 16 seconds and 85 milliseconds, almost 4 seconds faster than the silver medalist Poland. Jamaica got the bronze. More Olympic moms to watch and cheer on in Tokyo. Felix's medal in the individual 400, her first bronze, gave her more than any woman in Olympic track and field history, besting the record held by Jamaica's Merlene Ottey. Felix finished with a time of 49.46 seconds, a season best. Bahamian runner Shawnee Miller-Weibo, the Rio gold medalist, dominated the race to win gold. The Dominican Republic's Marilady Paulino took silver. The 35-year-old U.S. track star has now won 11 medals across 5 Olympics, 7 gold, 3 silver and 1 bronze. Felix surpassed the legendary Carl Lewis record of 10 for most by an American track athlete. Felix qualified for Friday's 400-meter final after placing second in her semifinal heat this week with a time of 49.89 seconds. The U.S. women's 400-meter relay team also advanced to the medal round after winning their heat on Thursday. She did not run in the heats, but Felix was selected to run in Saturday's final. The U.S. team also competed in the 4x400 mixed relay final on July 31, minus Felix, winning bronze. She had been considered a possibility for that race. The Los Angeles resident competed in the 400 after finishing second at the U.S. Olympic team trials for track and field in June with a season best time of 50.02 seconds. The legendary athlete is one of the most decorated in her sport. She won a silver in the 200-meter in her Olympic debut as a teenager at the 2004 Athens Games. Even if she wins another medal in the 4x400, totaling 11, she'll come up one shy of Finnish runner Paavo Nurmi, who holds the all-time record for track and field medals with 12. In 2019, just 10 months after giving birth to her daughter, Felix broke the record for most gold medals of any athlete at the Track and Field World Championship, when she clinched her 12th and 13th world titles. More Allison Felix and Athleta team up to cover child care costs for athlete moms. The mom has been a prominent voice against gender inequality in sports. Writing in the New York Times in 2019, Felix detailed her lack of maternity protections with her then-sponsor Nike after giving birth to her daughter, Cameron. Following the publication of the opinion piece, Nike announced a new maternity policy for all sponsored athletes. She recently launched a lifestyle brand, Saish, that she says was inspired by her experience with gender injustice during her journey to motherhood. She also has teamed up with apparel company Athleta and the Women's Sports Foundation to launch the Power of She Fund, child care grants, which help cover childcare costs for professional mom athletes traveling to competitions. Your child will wait for another child to die. Amid COVID-19 surge, Dallas County has no pediatric ICU beds left. County judge says, CNN, COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations are surging and in Dallas County, Texas. There are 0 ICU beds left for children, County Judge Clay Jenkins said in a news conference Friday morning. That means if your child's in a car wreck, if your child has a congenital heart defect or something and needs an ICU bed, or more likely if they have COVID and need an ICU bed, we don't have one. Your child will wait for another child to die, Jenkins said. Your child will just not get on the ventilator. Your child will be care-flighted to Temple or Oklahoma City or wherever we can find them a bed. But they won't be getting one here unless one clears. The judge added no ICU beds have been available for children for at least 24 hours. The Texas Department of State Health Services told CNN the shortage of pediatric ICU beds is related to a shortage in medical staff. Hospitals are licensed for a specific number of beds and most hospitals regularly staff fewer beds than they are licensed for. They can't use beds that aren't staffed. With the increase in COVID cases, hospitals are experiencing a shortage of people to staff the beds that they are licensed for, department spokesperson Laura Anton said in an email. Adding that staffing agencies in the state are working on recruiting medical surge staff from across the U.S. Earlier in the week, Texas Gov. Greg Abbott announced more than 2,500 medical staff would be deployed to hospitals in the state to help with the increasing number of COVID-19 patients. More than 11,200 people are hospitalized with COVID-19 in Texas, according to state data, with roughly 323 ICU beds left available statewide. Jenkins spoke alongside other elected officials as well as leaders from the Workers' Defense Action Fund and other groups who said Abbott's handling of the pandemic is putting residents in danger. In July, Abbott issued an executive order combining many of his earlier COVID-19 orders, which included language that no governmental entity, including school districts, could require masks. Dallas was among several Texas counties that sued the governor this month and asked for a restraining order against Abbott's order to be able to implement mask mandates in hopes of curbing the spread of the virus. On Tuesday, Judge Tanya Parker determined Dallas County residents have and will continue to be damaged and injured by Abbott's order and ruled that Jenkins, the county judge, should be allowed to implement mitigation strategies at the local level to protect the community. Jenkins on Wednesday issued an emergency order mandating masks in certain public spaces in the county, including at county offices and buildings and commercial entities, providing goods or services directly to the public. The emergency order also mandates masks indoors for students, teachers, staff and visitors at county child care centers and schools, regardless of vaccination status. Our hospitals and our people desperately need some time to get bed capacity and doctor capacity up so their hospitals won't be overrun, Jenkins said Friday morning, in an attempt to block the local mask mandate. Abbott and Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton filed a petition saying the county's emergency order violates the governor's order. This isn't the first time we have dealt with activist characters. It's déjà vu all over again, Paxton said in a statement Wednesday. Attention-grabbing judges and mayors have defied executive orders before, when the pandemic first started. And the courts ruled on our side, the law. I'm confident the outcomes to any suits will side with liberty and individual choice, not mandates and government overreach. But with healthcare staff overworked and hospital resources strained, stakes are very high, Jenkins said in the Friday conference, and added that it's not asking that much of people to wear a mask. We do need to push back on these attempts to erode local control because government works best when it's closest to the people, Jenkins said. But we need to remember also This is not a battle between Governor Abbott and local leaders who happen to be Democrats or school board members. We are all on Team Public Health, the judge said. And every person needs to understand that the enemy is the virus, it's not each other. CNN's Keith Allen contributed to this report. The big hole in Biden's Afghan speech. CNN, President Joe Biden claimed in his speech to the nation on Monday that he was bound by the Trump administration's agreement with the Taliban to withdraw all U.S. troops from Afghanistan. However, there are multiple flaws with this argument. First, the Taliban never observed the terms of that agreement, including that they would break ties with al-Qaeda. According to a UN report released earlier this year, they didn't. Second, the agreement said that the Taliban would enter genuine peace negotiations with the Afghan government. That didn't happen either. Third, the U.S. Taliban agreement was negotiated without any input from the Afghan government, which, after all, was the elected government of the country. Conveniently for the Taliban, they don't believe in elections. So, the Biden administration felt bound to an agreement made by the previous administration with an insurgent group that had excluded the actual government of Afghanistan. But not long prior, the Trump administration jettisoned the 2015 Iranian nuclear agreement, which was negotiated by the Obama administration with a sovereign state and with some of the United States' closest allies, the British, French, and Germans. That agreement was actually being adhered to by the Iranians, according to the American intelligence community. That didn't stop Trump from abandoning the Iranian nuclear agreement in 2018, which he often described as a terrible deal, even though it was actually working. Now, the Biden administration is saying it had to adhere to Trump's genuinely terrible deal with the Taliban, even though it wasn't working at all. What the administration has done in Afghanistan doesn't make much sense. Biden could have easily said the Taliban had reneged on their agreement with the United States so he could continue to keep a relatively small U.S. military force in Afghanistan to advise and assist the Afghan army and to support the Afghan Air Force to thwart Taliban advances. But Biden also believes in the merits of leaving Afghanistan regardless of Trump's agreement with the Taliban. He argues that the U.S. can't be mired in endless wars. Even though the American presence in Afghanistan had shrunk to only 2,500 troops, particularly few for a force of 1.3 million active-duty U.S. service personnel. That small force helped to sustain the Afghan military physically and psychologically, not least with close air support. Now, the Biden administration unilaterally has pulled the plug on the U.S. troop presence in Afghanistan, which cratered morale among the Afghan military and population. It also precipitated thousands of Western Allied soldiers to head for the exits, as well as the many thousands of contractors in Afghanistan that were, among other things, keeping the Afghan Air Force aloft. And now the white flags of the Taliban flutter all over Afghanistan. It did not need to be this way. New Zealand announces it's locking down the entire country. Over one COVID case, CNN, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has announced a nationwide lockdown after the country confirmed one coronavirus case, the first locally transmitted COVID-19 case in the community since February. Ardern told a press conference Tuesday authorities were assuming it was the contagious Delta variant, although genome sequencing is still underway. An unvaccinated 58-year-old man in the country's largest city, Auckland, tested positive for the virus. The man had traveled to other parts of the country, and had obvious link to the border. Director General of Health Ashley Bloomfield said Tuesday, New Zealand will be under the strictest lockdown level for the next 3 days starting from 11:59 p.m. Tuesday, local time. Ardern said, under Level 4 lockdown, everyone must stay home and businesses are closed aside for essential services such as supermarkets and pharmacies. New Zealand was last under its most serious lockdown level a year ago. Ardern said. Auckland and the Coromandel Peninsula, an area of the country's North Island where the patient traveled, are likely to be under a level 4 lockdown for a week. We are one of the last countries in the world to have the Delta variant in our community, Ardern said. We're in the position to learn from experience overseas, and what actions work. And what actions don't work. Delta has been called a game changer. And it is. It means we need to again go hard and early to stop the spread. We have seen what can happen elsewhere if we fail to get on top of it. We only get one chance. New Zealand has been praised for its handling of the virus, which saw it close borders to almost all foreign nationals early, and impose strict state-run quarantines on incoming travelers. That approach has seen it avoid the devastating outbreaks seen in other countries, and, prior to Tuesday's announcement, life in the country had largely returned to normal. New Zealand has reported fewer than 3,000 COVID-19 cases and only 26 deaths in a population of about 5 million. But New Zealand has been slow to vaccinate. According to data collated by CNN, New Zealand has fully immunized less than 20% of its population. Neighboring Australia, which was also previously praised for its handling of the virus, has been battling its own Delta outbreak for the last few weeks. More than half of Australia's population are in lockdown, and the country's most populous city, Sydney, has been in lockdown since June. Earlier this month, New Zealand announced plans to begin reopening its doors to vaccinated travelers from low-risk countries from early 2022, signaling a tentative relaxation of strict pandemic border controls. CNN's Angus Watson and Paul DeWitt contributed reporting from Sydney, Australia.